Holiday cactus are one of those plants that have been around for decades and decades. Your grandma might have had one, it gave you a little cutting, and now you've got one. Or maybe you just recently purchased one like we have right here in store. But in any case, they're fantastic because they're so easy to grow, and depending on which one you have, there are three, it'll bloom during the holidays of different holidays that we have. So this one is a Thanksgiving cactus characterized by these really sharp corners. They're not actually like spiky or anything, but they're very distinct in their shape. But there's also a Christmas cactus and there is a spring cactus as well. They're very similar. They're identical in care, but the leaf and the blooms are slightly different. But let's get into the care instructions for this classic houseplant. Very first thing is they're going to need very bright light. To get a ton of blooms like this, you kind of have to think of it like the leaves are the solar panel, and down the roots we've got the battery. And we have to expose the leaves to so much light so that they can sort of save it up and charge up the battery, so to speak, so that come the appropriate season, again, depending on which cactus you have, it will explode with the blooms. It'll push out all that energy into making all these nice colorful blooms that we have. What I like to do as soon as I can put it outside in the springtime, when our mornings or our days are above 50 degrees, I put it outside in full shade and I keep it there as long as possible. This is going to give it really good light so that come the fall or springtime, it's going to explode with these blooms. If you're going to keep it indoors, just make sure it has a really wide view of the sky. Remember, these need a lot of light. So place it in an east window, a west window, or a south window that has a big wide view of the sky. Now again, these are cactus, but they are tropical cactus, so they do need more frequent watering than some of the more desert type cactus that store a lot more water. These do have a little bit of succulent tendencies in their leaves. They do store a tiny bit of water, but nothing compared to like a standard like desert cactus, you know, that holds a ton of water. So I like to water these when they're about 25% dry. And you can do that year round. If you want to let them go down to 50% in between waterings, that's fine too. Next, we'll talk about fertilizing. So during the growing season, which is spring through summer months, you're gonna want to fertilize this plant with just a general purpose, well-balanced fertilizer. You can use granular, or you can use liquid soluble. Either way is perfectly fine, whichever works for your situation. I don't usually bust myths on the care guide, but this one is so rooted in myths, I have to talk about it just a little bit. So the thing is, people will say, to get these to bloom, you have to put them in a closet. Just throw them in a closet and they will produce the blooms. And the idea behind that is that what triggers the blooms are shorter days. So they have a lot more periods of darkness, and that's one of the things that triggers the blooms. The other thing that triggers the bloom is the temperature change, so it gets a little bit colder. So like a cooler garage or a cooler closet, that's going to, the idea is that's going to help stimulate the buds and the growth. And to some degree it will. Like if you want to get like competition growers, like really a ton of buds, taking the temperature down is a fantastic thing to do, but you don't really need to. You can still achieve a lot of blooms like this by just keeping it in your home. Naturally, as our days get shorter, you know, we have less hours of daylight, your plant is going to recognize that. So you don't need to go to the extreme of putting it in a closet or someplace where it gets absolutely no light. The shorter days will be enough to trigger the bloom. What I like to do, again, is just to keep it outside as long as possible. Earlier, we talked about keeping this plant outside during this, as soon as we can during the spring months. And I leave that all the way until they will start to bud. Usually around November is when they're going to do it here in North Texas. But those cooler nights, you know, when our cooler nights get into like the 40s and the 50s, that's what's going to trigger a lot of these, a lot of the blooms to come up for you. And then as soon as they do, I just bring it inside. Again, if you're going to keep it inside all year long, perfectly fine. You'll still get a lot of blooms as long as it has proper light. If you, again, if you really want to have a ton of blooms, about 6 or 8 weeks before the appropriate season, so again, this is a Thanksgiving cactus, so you could say about 2 months before Thanksgiving, that would be September, you can start fertilizing with a higher phosphorus fertilizer. That's the middle number on your fertilizer ratio. So if you want to fertilize this with a little bit higher ratio, that's going to help the blooms really bud out and get you more blooms. But again, it's not totally necessary. You can use your regular fertilizer all year long and achieve a really nice healthy cactus. But that's going to do it for the care instructions for the holiday cactus.